Eric the Red was exiled from Norway for killing a man. He moved to Iceland. There, he killed two more men and got exiled again. With nowhere left to go, he sailed west to a frozen, barely habitable landmass and named it Greenland to trick people into following him. One of history's earliest documented cases of deceptive advertising. But Eric the Red wasn't an anomaly. He was the pattern. Viking Atlantic expansion was driven by people too restless, too violent, or too land-hungry for even Scandinavia to contain. They reached North America 500 years before Columbus. Eric the Red's story is entertaining, but it's structural. He wasn't an exception. He was the product of five forces pushing Vikings across the Atlantic. The first force, overpopulation on uncultivable land. Scandinavia looks empty on a modern map, but most of its surface is rock, mountain, and forest, land you can't farm. Even a modest population hits the ceiling fast. The issue isn't total people, it's people per usable acre. By the 9th century, that ratio was unsustainable. Young men needed land, and Scandinavia had none left to give. The second force, exploiting others' weakness. In the 9th century, the Carolingian Empire, that's Charlemagne's empire and its fragmented successors, was collapsing from within. Anglo-Saxon England was divided into small, rival kingdoms. This reveals a recurring pattern throughout history. A less settled, militarized population exploits the decline of a wealthier civilization. Germanic tribes overran Rome in the 5th century. Mongol horsemen conquered much of Eurasia in the 13th century. The Vikings weren't unique barbarians. They were one instance of a pattern that repeats across centuries and continents. Third, internal feuding and exile. The founding legends of both Iceland and Greenland feature men too violent even for Viking society. Exile served as a safety valve, channeling destructive energy outward rather than letting it destroy communities from within. Eric the Red is the archetype. But the pattern was structural, not limited to one man's temper. Fourth, a favorable climate window. The 10th and 11th centuries were unusually warm across the North Atlantic. Scholars call this the medieval warm period. That warmth made the long ocean crossings survivable. It turned marginal coastal land in Iceland and Greenland into viable pasture for cattle and sheep. Climate scholars debate the precise temperatures, but the broad correlation between warming and Norse expansion is widely accepted. Fifth, a cult of personal valor. Viking culture didn't just tolerate violent bravery, it elevated it into the highest form of status. Reputation was everything. Warriors competed for glory the way merchants competed for gold. The most honored men were those who pushed farthest, fought hardest, risked the most. When a culture's supreme achievement is the daring deed, people keep pushing the frontier. Those are the five forces: overpopulation, others' weakness, exile, a warm climate window, and the warrior honor code. 3 pushed Vikings out: overpopulation, exile, the drive for glory. 2 pulled them toward opportunity: others' weakness, and a warming climate. Together, they drove a chain of settlement across the entire North Atlantic. Now follow that chain: Iceland, Greenland, North America. Iceland, 800 miles from Norway, 1 week to a month by open sea. When the Norse arrived around 870, the island was uninhabited. The Gulf Stream kept the coasts surprisingly mild, not the frozen wasteland the name might suggest. Volcanic rock covered the interior, but coastal strips offered real pasture. Iceland's economy ran on exports: cod, seal fur, walrus skin for ship ropes, walrus ivory, and narwhal tusks from Icelandic waters, sold in medieval Europe as genuine unicorn horns. Documented trade, not legend. By 930, every habitable strip of coastline was claimed. The community needed governance, so Icelanders created the Althing, a parliament, an open-air assembly of free citizens, roughly 1,000 years ago, one of the oldest parliaments on Earth. Iceland also produced the sagas, epic stories of honor, treasure, and violence written down in the 13th century. They describe the Viking Age, but they're not documentaries. Think of them like American Western films. Westerns reflect real frontier values, independence, toughness, violent justice, but they dramatize and mythologize the actual past. The sagas work the same way for Viking Age Iceland. Culturally revealing, but not historically literal. Read them for values, not for facts. Greenland. Remember Eric the Red's sales pitch. Even during the medieval warm period, calling that island green was generous, but the western coast really was warmer, warm enough for cattle pasture. Settlers arrived in 986 and built a community. They even established a bishopric at Garda, a district under a bishop's authority, though few bishops ever chose to live there. Then the climate turned. Temperatures dropped through the 13th and 14th centuries. The pasture land failed. By around 1400, the Norse had abandoned Greenland entirely. But the Inuit, people adapted to polar conditions, stayed. Uninhabitable is always relative to your technology and a culture. From Greenland, the Norse pushed farther west. Around the year 1000, Norwegians from the Greenland settlements reached Labrador. They called it Markland, meaning forest land, and Newfoundland, which they called Vinland. The Vinland saga narrates these voyages, this eastern mythology, at a site called Lands Meadows in Newfoundland, pronounced roughly Lanzo Meadows. Archaeologists uncovered unmistakable Viking structures, turf walls, iron rivets, a smithing forge, confirmed pre-Columbian European presence in North America, but the settlements lasted only about 20 years. Conflict with Native Americans made the cost of staying exceed any possible benefit. The Vikings weren't militarily outmatched. They made a strategic withdrawal. The distance was too great, the supply line too thin, the resistance too persistent. One footnote. The Vinland map at Yale's Beineck Library claims to show Viking territories in the New World. It's been proven a forgery. Scholarly rigor matters even when the underlying history is real. Step back and look at the full chain. Iceland settled 870, still inhabited today. Greenland settled 986, abandoned after roughly 4 centuries. North America reached around 1000, gone within 20 years. Each successive leap across the Atlantic was more fragile than the last. 2 variables determined the outcome, climate and resistance. Where climate was manageable and no one pushed back, Iceland's settlement became permanent. Where climate turned hostile, Greenland, the colonies slowly died over centuries. Where local populations actively resisted and the supply lines stretched impossibly far, North America, the settlement barely survived a single generation. Right? The Viking Atlantic chain is an early and a vivid case study in the limits of expansion. Scandinavia has been a major force in European geopolitics only twice. The Viking centuries and the 17th century under Gustavus Adolphus. The Atlantic expansion was one of those rare windows. Its legacy endures. The sagas, the Althing, the archaeological proof at Lands Meadows. The Atlantic was crossed long before 1492. Columbus was not the first European in the Americas. He was the first whose arrival led to permanent colonization, and that difference matters more than priority. Expansion doesn't fail because people lack courage. It fails when the environment or the opposition makes the cost unbearable. Eric the Red could name ice Greenland, but he couldn't make the climate obey.